We're so excited to have this special collaboration with NASA Johnson Space Center, and we're honored to present this historic event. I'm also very excited to introduce the moderator for our program. She's also the first African-American woman to be the director of NASA Johnson Space Center, Vanessa Wyche.
I'm happy to be here with you all at Space Center Houston. Today, we're going to hear from former and current astronauts who will share with you their own journeys to space. Robert Curbeam, Jeanette Epps, Bernard Harris, Leland Melvin, Stephanie Wilson, Victor Glover, I'm going to start with a question, and I'm going to throw it out and would like for everyone to have an opportunity to give a response. Describe to us a picture of who you thought you would be as a student or young child. What were you studying, and what type of person did you think you could be? We'll start with Stephanie.
Well, when I was in middle school, I was very fortunate that my parents were very supportive and education was very important to them. And I was given a school assignment in a career awareness class to interview somebody that worked in an interesting career field, and I was interested in astronomy at the time. And after talking to a local area astronomy professor, I was fascinated by his work. I thought that that would be an excellent way to contribute to being a STEM professional.
When I was a really young kid, probably 6th grade, my mother gave me this age-inappropriate non-OSHA certified chemistry set. And I mixed these two dissimilar chemicals and created the most incredible explosion in my mother's living room. I burned a hole in her carpet. And my mother she was small, but she had the power to knock me off the... But it was that moment that I realized that I could be a chemist because I'd already done it. All I needed was a lab coat and goggles. So chemistry was something that I learned at an early age, and I love sports, but I never saw myself going into the NFL because I don't know, for whatever reason, but I did see myself as a scientist. So STEM was always something that was very critical to me.
It's funny, I think it all starts with chemistry because my mother was a chemistry teacher. And as I got older, the chemistry set kept getting bigger and bigger. I didn't burn a hole in her carpet, thank God, because I might not be here if that happened. But that was always interesting to me. And I grew up in Baltimore during a time when Apollo was big, so I just kept seeing these larger and larger rockets being designed. And design always interested me, and I always thought I was going to be a design engineer. That's what I was going to be.
So as a kid, I didn't really know who I thought I would be when I grew up. I just kind of, did my thing and, did my work. And one day, when I was about 9 years old, my twin sister and I, we brought home our report cards. And back then you had a report card and you had a row of all your grades and you could see immediately, okay, you had all A's or B's or whatever. And, Janet and I, we were pretty obedient kids, and we knew that if we brought home anything less than an A, our mother was not gonna be happy. And yeah, she knew how to throw a shoe or whatever to make sure you stayed in line. But, one day we brought our report cards home, and my older brother goes, wow, you guys can probably become aerospace engineers or even an astronaut. And my 9-year-old brain said, well, they'll never pick me to be an astronaut, but I can definitely become an aerospace engineer. And so at 9, I had set my sights on becoming an engineer, an aerospace engineer. I didn't even know what it was.
I guess the first version of who I saw, that I could become was my father. My father was a police officer in Pomona, where I grew up. And so I just really was blown away by the way people responded to him, and so I looked up to him, but other people clearly didn't. So I wanted to be a police officer like my father. I also looked up to Marcus Allen, Los Angeles Raiders running back, and I wanted to be like Marcus Allen. So sports were important. My father and his influence were important. And then I saw a shuttle launch on TV and thought I would love to control that thing and drive one of those. And so the interest in tinkering and machines and speed and power and sports, and also just wanting to be a good person like my father, those things all wove together and in one way or another led to me being here.
So I was listening to the others talk about what inspired them, and what inspired me was what inspired a lot of American kids back in the 60s. I grew up watching the space program. I learned very early that I liked science and science fiction, so I always like to say that I was an original Star Trek fan, and so that got me exposed to space on television, but in real life, I watched the program develop, you know, the Mercury program, Gemini program, Apollo program. And in 1969, when I turned 13 years old, I watched Neil and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon, and I said, I want to follow in their footsteps.
Here, men from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon, July 1969, AD.
And as I looked around at NASA, to the point that we're talking about race, I didn't see anybody who looked like me. I didn't see any women. In fact, the first people that they selected to be the creme de la creme, you know, the top astronauts were white guys, all white guys. And so I remember saying to myself, even though I don't see anybody who looks like me, I'm still not going to let that deter me from deciding on what I wanted to do.
Did race ever play a role in the idea of who you could be?
Did race ever play a factor? I would say one major area where race played a factor was in high school. So as I'm kind of starting to develop this plan on how do I become those things, and I knew college was in my path, but I didn't have any, neither of my parents went to college. So, you know, we were having to figure this out together. And the Naval Academy came to my house and said, do you want to play football at Annapolis? And I was like, nope, no thank you. And West Point came, said the same thing. And I said, nope. And Annapolis actually came back and says, would you like to wrestle? And that was really my main sport. I love football. I wanted to be like Marcus Allen, but I was a better wrestler. And you want to come grapple at Annapolis? And I said, no, thank you. And so I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Boys in the Hood, but the father in that movie is Furious Styles. And the conversation that he has with his son is something very similar to how I felt. It was that there wasn't a place for me in the military. And so I go off to college, and one of my mentors, I'm in his office waiting for him to come in. He's one of the few black faculty members at my university. And he comes into the room, and as he steps in, he is in this full regalia, the black suit with the gold around the wrists and the hat. And I was like, wow, sir, when did you enlist? And he said, I'm actually an officer in the Navy Reserves. Boom. The next version of what I could become. And that to me was, there's so many lessons I pulled from that, but the power of exposure and seeing yourself in something.
Hello everyone, Victor Glover here, checking in during my 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station.
When we were growing up in the 60s, it was interesting to see some of the greatest feats of humankind on the television, little black and white television, but turn the channel and see some of the greatest challenges that we had in the United States at the time. So, watching Martin Luther King at the same time we're going to the moon, it was incredible. Talking to my mom, who was a teacher, who said, would always ask us, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? And kind of pushing us. And I remember going to her and saying, Mom, I know what I want to be. I want to be an astronaut. And she said, that's nice. And started to turn around, but then again, she turned back, she said, but if that's what you want to do, you can be and do anything that you want.
Good time.
As a kid, I became interested in airplanes, and I liked making model airplanes and reading books on airplanes. And I was fascinated by airplanes. And so that proved to be what I find later on to be my passion.
You know, I don't know if I had a vision of who I wanted to be when I was younger, but I will tell you this. I think I was born to be an engineer. And I think specifically, I was born to be an electrical engineer.
I remember being in, I think it was 7th grade. We had this assignment before we could take off early to go to recesses. You had to write down where you saw yourself in, I don't know, 10, 15, 25 years. And I simply wrote down on my little assignment sheet that I want to be able to look up from where I was working and see the curvature of the Earth from space. And I plunked that down on the desk and headed off to recess.
My mother was my main inspiration. They discovered art when I was in preschool, and she had me in every art class that ever was. And she got me a library card when I was 4. And we had conversations, and she would talk about astronomy and orbital mechanics and space.
I grew up in the segregated South, so I am a son of the South, if you will. Blacks and whites went to separate schools and had separate facilities and everything. But in the mid-50s or so, there were lots of programs on television that talked about life in the military and actually promoted the military. So that's where I saw the Naval Academy. I fell in love with the uniforms more than anything else, and the beauty of what's called the Yard. It's the campus of the U.S. Naval Academy. And it didn't hurt that all the pretty girls from all over the Northeast came there on the weekends looking for husbands.
You sort of assume that astronauts never had hard times. Yes, I've had hard times too.
At some point in everybody's life, they're going to have that moment where they're going to have to step off the ledge. They're going to have to just make that push out into the void. And it's always, always, always going to be an extreme gut check.
But I think the important thing is to keep your goal in mind. And my goal was to succeed and eventually become an astronaut, and to be patient enough in order to hang in there. In other words, don't quit.
Don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't do something, and always have an alternative plan if things in your life kind of go awry.
You never learn a damn thing with your successes. And so the idea of failure is probably the best thing that can happen to people who want lasting success. Because on the next time around, you think your way through a better way, a more creative way to get through to your success. And then it forces you to be creative.
Well, I feel very honored to be the first Black astronaut to fly in space. And in that role, one of the things that I wanted to do is not only be a role model for African Americans on the ground, but also be a leader in helping pull other Black astronauts into space with me.
It is hugely important to see people who look like you and who can inspire you, especially in fields that you want, because it shows you, right there, the people that are there that you can touch, that you can feel, that you can reach out to, that you can talk to, that, if they can do it, then there's a chance for me to do it too.
When I was first thinking about becoming an astronaut, I asked my father, can Black people become astronauts? Remember, this is just a few years after the Civil Rights Act of '64 had been passed, and there was still a lot of segregation. It didn't go away overnight. And he looked at me, he says, not only can you be an astronaut, there have been people, Black people. There was at least one Black pilot who was selected to be an astronaut. But the fact that he had gone out there and had blazed that trail meant to me as a 5-year-old boy that there was no limit. Nobody's going to stand in my way. The only way I was not going to become an astronaut is if I decided not to become an astronaut. And I needed that role model out there to inspire me.
I have a connection to all the African American astronauts because in some way either we were in the office together and so we share experiences from that, or they came before me and I met them, and it's just a small sorority/fraternity, and we try to support each other, and we get together every once in a while and talk, and so it's a great group to be a part of, and I appreciate each and every one of them.
and the heroes themselves.
I want to frame this as this is all about you guys because you are our future. And again, he said, ask us anything, but the transparency and the authenticity is so important that you guys go back because you're the leaders.
What would the next big culture shift, what would you like to see? What would you want it to be?
When I think about what Elon Musk is doing, Jeff Bezos, these billionaires are spending a lot of money on these new platforms that's going to enable us to have that life, to have that economy in space. But then when I go to our communities, our Black and brown communities, and see what the kids are doing and seeing whether they're prepared for that future, that's when I'm gonna go, oh, we got a lot of work to do. Because if we're not there, and we're gonna be stuck on Earth, right? They're gonna leave us behind. So my vision is that we don't get left behind as a people.
I gotta tell a quick story. So yesterday, I was in National Car Rental, getting my car, and this little lady was right here. I was like, hey, she saw my NASA shirt on. She said, NASA, oh, is there this thing tomorrow at Space Center Houston? I'm like, yeah, are you coming? Oh, no, I didn't fill out the application. I didn't do it. That's it. And she was supposed to be off yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. She was there, I was there, and she is here today because she was supposed to be here today to hear this. Chemistry major, gonna rule the world one day, maybe be Elon Musk too. We don't know, right?
Right.
But this is where it starts.
Like, we're talking a lot about what we see for the future and like shaping a lot of the stuff for the future. And there's so many schools, so many elementary schools that don't have a lot of funds and et cetera, but people like you come in and they talk, and then my life has changed. Now I'm an astronaut. That's crazy. For me, I've always wanted to be a scientist. I've always wanted to work like in NASA. I've always wanted to do, this has been my entire life. Like when I was 2 years old, I drew a permanent marker on the wall, all of my friends, and they were all astronauts, et cetera. And I've always known what I wanted to do with myself. So it was beautiful that I felt like the universe came in with the confirmation, like, hey, well, you're a little bit nervous about starting classes back up, but here goes Leland. And he comes in with all this positivity and like, yeah, you should do it. And I did.
Honestly, coming from places where I came from, I never see anybody aspire to work for NASA to be an astronaut or to be in these fields. So seeing people, these heroes, reaching these heights, it lets me know, hey, you know what, I can do this, it's possible.
I often find myself, sometimes having a lack of motivation. I often tell myself I can't do something. If something gets too difficult, or if I just get frustrated, or if I fail too many times at something. It's like I often just see myself kind of like almost giving up. So it's all like, for y'all to be in such, leadership and strong positions, accomplish so much within y'all time, like, how do y'all stay motivated?
So one thing that I think about, which can kind of seem like a burden at times, but it can also be the power to keep going. Like, I love thinking about the civil rights era and like the fact that when you see them getting off those buses, going to the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, say the whole title, they had bags in their hands. They didn't make those sandwiches. There was a party making sandwiches, and then there was a different group of people that took the sandwiches to the people, and then there was a different group of people directing them to get on the buses. They were organized, right? And that work was done so you could sit in this seat. And when you think about that, our legacy runs from the very beginning up to you right now.
It's deep, bro.
It's your job to keep it on. And sometimes that can seem like a burden, but it's also a privilege. We are connected to all that. We come from greatness.
What are the emotions that come to your mind when you think about Juneteenth and the role that you play today?
Oh, wow. So Juneteenth is a way that we honor the fact that right here, not far from us, after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, we had slaves that were still enslaved. And it was 2 years after that process that they were able to actually attain the freedom. And so Juneteenth is now received a lot of attention, but it was something that wasn't widely celebrated. And so I'm encouraged to know that it's become something that is gaining national and maybe even global attention. But it also is a reminder that, we have come a long way, but we have a long way to go. The person who started the Journal of Negro History and then started Negro History Week, which is what we now celebrate as Black History Month. When he started it, he wrote in the journal, he said, we need not celebrate Negro history. We celebrate the Negro in history. What we need is history void of racial, gender, and religious bias, because it's our story, all of our stories. And so I'm just encouraged that we have a chance now to be a part of telling that story.
So Victor, I'm going to ask you, what strategic steps are needed to offer more persons of color in more active roles?
There's a lot of things we could do, and we don't have time. We could take all the time we have today to talk about just what we can do. But one thing that we must do is those of us who are already in this enterprise, we have to go and, it's not just like encouraging you. I love this saying, we say that we have space for you. Listen, we need you. We need you. When the baby boomer generation retires, the science and technology jobs that are going to go away, if you look at the university students in undergrad and graduate school right now, we don't have enough of you in science and tech to fill those jobs. So we need you. It is a national security imperative for you all to become the best you can be so that we can keep doing what we do.
And so we have an audience with students, and I know that they want to hear about your space time. So what was your most challenging time in space? Can you tell us that, Stephanie?
Probably my most challenging time was during the STS-120 mission. We were building the International Space Station. And so we were bringing the Node 2 module to the International Space Station.
Solar array deploys starting on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
And it's a smaller module. It's a connecting module on the end of the U.S. laboratory, but it allows our partner laboratories to have a connection point on the space station, our partners from Europe and Japan. And during that mission, we had installed that module, and it also required reconfiguring the electrical system. So we had to move one of the solar arrays from a central position to the end of the truss on the space station. And in order to do that with the robotic arm, basically have to fold up the solar array, move it with the robotic arm, and then extend it, re-extend it. And during that extension, we had a dynamic event.
Houston Alpha on the big loop. We detected some what appears to be a wraparound or some damage, and we're zoomed in on it on camera 24 right now.
So similar to what you may have heard about Apollo 13, where when we're in space, we have limited resources, we have limited materials, we have to fix whatever happens with what we have on board. Because of this relocation, it was hard for spacewalkers to reach, so we had to do something that we had not practiced before with the robotic arm and the boom sensor system that we used at the time for the orbiter. We hooked those two together, put the spacewalker at the end, and then sent him out to the work site with what we had fabricated on board, these cufflinks to tear across, to drape across the hole, to give the panel system additional rigidity so that we could continue the extension. So I say all that to say we worked together with our mission control team to come up with a solution, but we had to use the resources that we had in hand, do robotics and spacewalking operations that we had not performed before, and rely on each other's and our skills.
It's a good day's work right there.
I'm going to go back a little bit because it ties into the story she just told. And so I go into test pilot school, and we, as a class, have to go to a conference. And at this conference, the keynote speaker is Pam Melroy. And Pam Melroy, who is, I believe, the second female shuttle commander, stands up and tells that story. She tells the story about the cufflinks. They use the cufflinks. And she tells that story. And that's the day I decided, all right, I'm throwing an application in. So I also think it's neat how our stories do link together, like you just said, and I think that that's beautiful, this legacy here that continues to grow and evolve.
I found myself immediately thrown into a leadership situation for which I was unbelievably well prepared, but I didn't know it. because my idea of what I was going to have to do as a leader, as the leader of NASA, the leader of human spaceflight, the leader of science, the leader of space stuff for the whole world. If you've ever heard of, there is something called the imposter syndrome. It's a feeling that people get, I get all the time, that you don't belong where you are. And it's really important for you to recognize that you're suffering from the imposter syndrome, because it is a syndrome. It's not real. You do belong where you are, but you have had people put doubts in your mind for so long. And I had grown up in the segregated South, where I was taught to believe that things like being the NASA administrator or like being the president of the United States were not things to which I should aspire. That's not what Black people did. Where I thought I didn't belong, it turned out that not only did I belong, but I tended to, some people will say I excelled.
I mean, if you're really passionate about doing something, what you do, you end up finding out who does it really, really well. And because I had difficulty, because there were a lot of things I didn't know about art, but I had to think my way through it. A tragic story, the guy called me aside and asked me, don't bring any more of those things here. So now I had to be creative. Oh, really? So I went straight to the bank and I borrowed $60,000 and built a foundry. And I didn't know how to build a foundry. So I went to the people who make foundry equipment. And then when I got to the molds, I didn't know how to make a mold. So I went to the people who sold mold material, because I have to do it myself, because the larger community won't do it for me. So I've done that throughout my entire art career. If they close a door in my face and I go open it.
I am inspired. I am very hopeful that in the future there will be more women of color in space, to the point where we cannot name the number, right? The number is irrelevant.
As I said, my mother was a librarian, so I grew up loving books and poetry and stuff like that. And my favorite poet is a woman by the name of Nikki Giovanni. She wrote a poem many years ago, and it's called Quilting the Black-Eyed Pea. We are going to Mars. And this was before we started talking about taking trips to Mars, because in it she tells why people like me are ideally suited to lead the path to Mars.
Quilting the Black-Eyed Pea, we're going to Mars. We're going to Mars for the same reason Marco Polo rocketed to China, for the same reason Columbus trimmed his sails on the dream of spices, for the very same reason Shackleton was enchanted with penguins, for the reason we fall in love. It's the only adventure.
And that's the way the trip to Mars is going to be. We're going to be holed up in our spaceship, and the first few days we're going to be able to look back at our planet Earth and we'll see this little blue dot. And after a couple of weeks, that little blue dot's going to almost disappear. And there'll come a time somewhere in that 8-month journey when it doesn't make any difference which direction you look. You're not going to know where you're going, and you're not going to know where you came from, because it's all going to look just kind of woo. It's going to be black.
And also now joining us is Dr. Bobby Satcher, Robert Satcher, and he has logged over 259 hours in space and is currently a doctor in surgical oncology at MD Anderson. So thank you for joining us.
Well, my story is, of course, I grew up in Hampton, Virginia, and there's Langley that was there, and was inspired, to want to try to be an astronaut from pretty early on, from watching Apollo missions, and of course didn't see anybody that looked like myself during that. Wasn't until the shuttle era, and some of my co-astronauts here that sort of blazed that trail. When I was in college is when I sort of first thought that I could do it. had the chance to meet Ron McNair. He also, went to MIT for his graduate studies, and he was there giving a talk. And so that was the first time that I sort of said to myself, I was an undergraduate at MIT, but first time I sort of said, yeah, maybe that's something I could do. So yeah, that was a very inspirational moment.
We did talk about, the fact that representation matters. And so two of our space heroes that actually sacrificed on behalf of all of us, their spouses are here today, and I want to recognize them. I want to recognize Cheryl McNair, and I also want to introduce Sandy Anderson. She's the spouse of Mike Anderson. So thank you both for being here. And Jeanette, want to bring you into the conversation.
All right, well, my journey is very similar to everyone's here, but there's always these different nuances. We were talking earlier about, you're going to have things to get through, and I think all of us had similar experiences. And, you grew up in segregated areas, and things happen, but I always focus on how do you handle those things when they do occur, because they're going to occur. There's a verse in the Bible that always says that, in this world, you're going to have tribulation, but take heart. I've overcome the world. And so that just tells me that troubles are going to come. And so how do you handle those? And, having a sense of self and knowing who you are and what you're capable of and not letting people feed negative energy into your life is hugely important. But also being a proactive person rather than being reactive has been things that I've stood on for my entire career. I'm like a Black female aerospace engineer. There was no one that looked like me in aerospace engineering, but that never even dawned on me until I left there. These are the kind of things that I always love to tell students, there's gonna be times when you have to figure out who you are, and it's in those tough times that you actually really realize what you're capable of.
I really appreciate that, because a lot of times as a person, you get stuck in this place of fear to do something. I don't know if I'm going to fit into this space. I don't know if I should be here. I don't know what I should be doing or how I should be doing it. And you don't do it. you just sit. And it's easy to do that when you don't have people around you, or you're not meeting people who are doing things.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It's all about supporting one another. There's enough threats outside of the tent to fill a whole day. So we have to support each other all the time. If we do that, not a whole lot's gonna stop us.
Like, I often limited myself just because, basically like my surroundings. I just thought like the world, like I thought this was my world. And like one thing I'm learning too is how like, a lot of stuff may come up and you may be in a situation where you may not know where you are or you can't even find yourself, but we can't give up. Like, we just can't.
I mean, I always knew I wanted to do more than just be there and watching cars go by and stuff. And I didn't allow that to define my imagination in terms of, I sit there staring up at the sky and imagining what it would be like to go there. So I don't think I've ever said that before, but I actually would do that.
Okay, so I told my mom that I was coming to do this. I'm gonna show her that my notebook, because like that's actually my notebook that I still use for class right now. I'm gonna use this as like my motivation to really achieve my goals. Honestly, this really means the world to me. Like, this is like easily one of my most cherished items right now.
There's not always going to be somebody there to cheer you on. And as much as I would love to be that person. Break out your cell phone. I'll make a ringtone for you right now. You can play it every day. But that's not reality. And you're going to have to build something that works for you. So that's one of the important parts of learning and getting around groups of people like this that are diverse. You learn and you add another facet. You put another tool in your toolbox.
I always go back to like how my mother, she's very religious for a Christian household, but she always says walk by faith and not by sight, baby. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I feel like the Black community, we have a hard time with, because it's not only what we see, but it's what we're told from other people. So I feel like all of us can do it. I practice it, try to every day, because it's just so hard when the world's like telling you you can't, or that's impossible, or are you sure you can do that? But it's just like, I'm not walking by what I see, but what I know I can do by faith.
So I want to ask one of our astronauts to talk about his time doing a spacewalk. So the record holder for a single spaceflight mission of spacewalks is Robert Curbeam. Can you tell us about what it's like?
Hello, Beamer.
Oh my gosh, it's an amazing experience, and Bernard can tell you too. So when I first came to the office, shortly after I came into the office, Bernard did his first. So Bernard blazed a trail, and I tell people all the time, that's the best way to go. You have someone else that blazes a trail, and you get to walk down it. so I'm very thankful for that. And then after him, Winston, and so that was a great part of it. But we always had this saying, you train like you fly like you train. And then the first thing they tell you is, but when you go on a spacewalk, something's going to be different than you planned. And it is so true. My very first spacewalk, so I'm out there doing my thing, trying to follow the timeline, and all of a sudden, I am reconfiguring some ammonia lines, and one of the valves that is supposed to automatically close does not, and starts spraying me with anhydrous ammonia. And sure enough, training takes over. And, it's kind of funny because I talked to the flight surgeon later. He goes, during the emergency, actually, your heart rate went down. And it's because, the hard work's really done before you go on the spacewalk, when you're getting ready for it. So when things happen like that, and your, front of your suit has an inch or two of ammonia ice on it, and later on, you realize that you cannot go back in the spacecraft with this, so you hope that someone has a plan to get it off. And they did. But the lesson learned there is that, it's not actually the act of the event that is hard. It's getting ready for the event.
Yep.
And that's something I learned from Bernard and other people who told me, look, you have to work hard now so that the actual space flight and the spacewalk is easy. I mean, physically, it was not a big deal. Mentally, I was exhausted afterwards.
Right.
But worth it.
So we're going to open it up to our students.
Hi.
Hello.
What is your work like when you're not in space or training for a mission?
There's no average day. Some days I have a lot of meetings, but some days I get to go and scuba dive or full pressure dive at the giant pool that we have, 6 million gallons of water where we train for spacewalks. Or right on the other side of that facility, there's an airport, and we go fly our T-38 high-performance aircraft.
One of the biggest things that we have to do is function very well as a team. We go on expeditions where we want to get people to push everyone's limits to see how you act when you're in this heightened state of awareness.
We work hard on leadership and teamwork, and so it involves really just spending time together and being intentional.
My question today for you all is, do you think everyone should have the opportunity to travel to space?
That is a very good question. And the answer to it is yes. Let me fill in the blanks, though. So I think everybody should have the opportunity to go into space, but currently, right now, it's not available for everybody to go. But we have now set the stage for anyone that wants to go into space to go into space. We now have private interests in what's happening in low Earth orbit, particularly in the International Space Station, has opened up all sorts of possibilities. So all of you in this room, I'm just looking at your age group, you have been born in a world where we have been in space, where we lived in space, where we've had people in space 24/7. I grew up, and some of us here that are on the older side grew up, that was not the case. So the possibilities are really endless.
How many of you would like to go to space?
I love it.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Do it. You can do it.
In space, you're away from family and in a new environment. How are you physically and emotionally affected? How do you deal with being homesick?
I haven't even been back on Earth for a year yet, and that's just a sentence that starts with, I haven't been back on Earth is pretty cool. And the isolation is one piece. I live in this pressurized can, a big can in space, because right on the outside it's really hot or really cold and there's no air, right? So the fact that you're isolated doesn't mean that you have to be disconnected. And so the connection to your family is something NASA takes very seriously.
The video just doesn't do it justice. It is pretty amazing, though.
One of the most amazing things about his mission was that Stephanie organized a Zoom call for us, all of the Black astronauts, to talk to Victor while he gave us the tour through the space station on an iPad. And he was in space at the same time that, we were coming with the deliberations of George Floyd, and we had all these things that we were thinking about down here on the planet with COVID, but having this connection with our brothers and family and people helped us all get through things.
What boundaries did you have to overcome becoming an astronaut, and what did you ever struggle in school at any moment in time?
I lost my hearing in a training accident. I was completely deaf, and the doctors told me that I would never fly in space. And my hearing started to slowly come back in my right ear, but only in the speaking frequencies. And they said, you're medically disqualified, you won't fly. But I've always believed that if you keep trying, like the little engine that could, I think I can, your mind has a way, I'm not a neuroscientist, but your mind has a way of fixing your body, if you believe in it enough. You need doctors, you need other people, but you have a great stake in helping prepare yourself by the way that you have your outlook.
Bernard, I thought it would be good for you to talk about, having a vision and thinking about where do you want to go in life.
So when I did my spacewalk, I guess it was many years ago, it was the first time that an African-American had done a spacewalk. It had been 30 years since the first time that we had done a spacewalk.
Dr. Harris, tomorrow you're to become the first African-American to walk in space. How significant a first for that is for you is that personally?
Well, Brian, for me it really is a personal achievement, a great personal achievement, one that I've looked for a long time. And I think it's kind of ironic that during this month, this is Black History Month, that we're celebrating the contributions that African Americans have made to this country. But I have an opportunity to walk outside in space, that is, an EVA. I get emotional when I think about it. And I'd like to dedicate this spacewalk, my first spacewalk as an African American, and as an African American, to all African Americans, to African American achievement.
And so, of course, I got the commensurate call from the president, and that was President Clinton, and he said, Dr. Harris, I want to congratulate you on being the first African American to walk in space. And I remember preparing, knowing that he was going to call, and I said, what the hell am I going to say to the president? Because everybody's going to hear Mission Control and the rest of the world. And so I said these words that you've probably heard many times before. I said, Mr. President, thank you for the honor of your call, but I have to tell you that I may be the first, but I will not be the last.
Amen.
Yeah. And listening to Bob Curbeam, now holding the record, that was true. So what can I say to you that will inspire you? And maybe this statement, I believe that there are three things that I know about everybody in this room. Three things. And if you adhere to these three things, you can accomplish whatever you want to do in life. Those three things make it possible for you to do anything. The first thing that I believe, and believe in you, is that I believe that everyone is born multi-potential, with the ability to do anything that they want to do in life, anything. You have to figure out what that is. You have to discover that very early, as we all did. Number two, I believe that each and every one of you in this room is multi-talented. But we have something called a brain where we can learn additional talents, and that's what education is all about. So that's really important, right? And the last thing that I believe that's really important for success in life, and that is, I believe that each and every one of us were born for a reason. There is something that you are supposed to do, or some things that you are supposed to do in this life. Now, all of those require what? They require an active person, someone thinking, you figuring out who you are, where you are, what position, setting goals, dreaming, finding people to help you along, finding mentors. And so it not only requires inspiration, but aspiration that comes from you.
So when I hear the words "the color of space," it brings to mind probably like a box of crayons, in that, you know, it has every color of the rainbow, as they say, and it's very inclusive. And I think that's the way space should be. It hasn't necessarily been that way in the past, but we are on a new trajectory, and we can change that.
So when I hear the color of space, the first thing that comes to mind is a standing joke between Leland Melvin and myself about when he was going up on his first flight. And because we go down the hall and I'd raise my fist and I go, "Keep space black, Leland, keep space black." And that went on between us. And when I was in space, I sent an email back to them and I said, "So, doing my best to maintain the blackness of space for everybody."
You know, the color of space, it's interesting, the theme of this whole celebration is the color of space. Space is black. It's except for where the stars are, it's the absence of light and the inability to know where you're going. And the people that I consider to be the best qualified to get there are people who look like me, who, in spite of all adversity, in spite of knowing whether they're going to live or die or make it to the next day, persist in being people who are eternal optimists.
I know that you have taken away many, many, many life lessons from these wonderful heroes. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank the audience for being here and being a part of this very historic occasion.
My takeaway from this experience is, don't just assume what you can do, but take that step to see that you can do it. Because a lot of times we think, oh, I can't do this, or we take from our experience or what people say or our surroundings, and we're like, well, I can't do this because of what such and such said or where I'm from.
When I was in the gift shop, I was looking at all, the national shirts, and it was this one shirt that said, "Failure is not an option." And I said, I need that because I need to believe that for myself right now.
And so your friends and family, do they know that you're here today?
My parents actually don't know, but they will know when I get back home. To come and meet astronauts, that was like the most exciting thing ever.
It was really inspiring. Like, I have so many feelings just because, like, one, you'll meet an astronaut every day.
During the conversation, it's kind of crazy because I'm very interested in things like quantum mechanics, theory of relativity. So I know this encourages me to keep going. I'm going to keep watching, keep learning. They're just like us. Like, I was expecting, my nerves were on me when I first walked in the room. I was like, but from their stories, I could tell they went through the same, some trauma, we all went through the same thing. And that just opened up like a level in my mind where I'm like, okay, time to scribe, time to pick up the slack, time to do what I gotta do.